Can you share with us how CDRI is raising awareness and helping countries put the tools and capacity in place to incentivize resilience?
We're a very young coalition established in 2019 by the government of India, but also with leadership from other governments. The agenda for this coalition is very clear. It's to work on Target D of the Sendai framework, which basically says that our countries are focusing on reducing risk that infrastructure failure brings to our communities. So CDRI, as the word, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, that's the agenda that we continue to work on over the last 6 years. Edwin, to your first question, how do you raise awareness about, or first part of your question, how do you raise awareness about the importance of resilience? So at CDRI, what we have tried to do is come up with a database of risk. When we talk to government leaders, the first thing we try to emphasize with them is that, do you realize that in your country, you're already losing infrastructure because of cyclones, earthquakes, floods, extreme heat, etc.? And we have translated that into numbers that we're able to use to talk to governments. So we have a portal that we've built. It's a public database looking at infrastructure risk or risk to infrastructure from 8 hazards. And this is a global database. So for every country, we've been able to project that annually. So for example, in Brazil loses about $12 billion of infrastructure on average every year. This is, again, roads damaged by landslides, communities that get flooded, rail network that gets interrupted for a variety of natural hazard related reasons, etc., etc. So when you aggregate all this per country, Brazil is 12 billion. In India, that's 32 billion. African continent, that's 12 billion. In the collective small island development states, that damage is less than 5 billion. So, these numbers have become quite useful in helping to elevate the discussions from a data point of view, from an evidence point of view, to say, why is it important to pay attention to this agenda? We've also looked at it globally. So when I aggregate this number at the global level, we're talking about $800 billion of average annual losses every year that as a globe, we suffer because of damage to infrastructure. This is only direct damage. Now, when you talk about the economic impact of this damage, we're also finding that economic impact is sometimes 7 times the actual damage to infrastructure. So again, when a road gets damaged in a mountainous region, it's not just the damage to the road, which is maybe landslide affected, but it's also the economic cost of that damage because people are not able to access markets, hospitals, etc., etc. So, this database has really been a powerful tool on our side to start to bring a conversation at the highest level to say why we have to pay attention to this topic. We've also translated this data into 2 publications that we've launched over the last 2 years. In the first publication, it was really about direct damages. In the second publication, we are now making a strong economic impact, economic analysis of how damage to infrastructure translates into economic costs. And that ranges by countries, and that ranges by how much a country's economy is dependent on their infrastructure sectors. So again, if you're a country that's heavily reliant on your transportation network for tourism, airports, etc., and it gets that critical infrastructure gets damaged, how does that translate into the economic impact on the community? So again, there's a publication that we came out and launched at COP, and there's several people in this room who have been part of that publication to make the economic argument for why we need to pay attention to disasters and the work around critical infrastructure that strengthens the work that is needed to strengthen infrastructure so that economic impacts are reduced. Another key finding in that report that I want to highlight is that all of us in the room probably recognize this, but when you start to translate recovery time, we're also finding that the sooner we can recover, the less is the impact on your economy. So when Japan gets hit by an earthquake and critical infrastructure is affected, and they bounce back within 1, 2, 3 years, the impact on their economy is much less compared to Haiti, where earthquake has damaged critical infrastructure, recovery has taken a much longer period, and then again, your economic impact is much higher. So we're making these arguments in a way to link resident infrastructure and the economic impact of not paying attention to it. So data and publications is one part of what we're trying to do. Second part of this is how do you translate that into action for people on the ground, right? I mean, I deal a lot with engineers or financiers who are basically saying, yeah, that's all okay. That's sort of that's a theoretical argument, but what do I need to do? Now, as a coalition, what we're trying to do is trying to bring methodologies to people who are trying to build or upgrade infrastructure. I'll give you an example from the state of Odisha in India. It's a coastal state heavily affected by cyclones. We're working there for the last 3 years with the government to understand how is the transmission and distribution system going to be affected by changing cyclonic patterns in the future. We're finding that wind speeds and the infrastructure that is designed for a particular wind speed, it's already outdated. So what do you start to do? So it's literally breaking down the risk into actual decisions that the ministry has to think about in terms of saying, where do I prioritize upgrading? What are the opportunities that I have in front of me? What are the cost of that? And if I don't pay attention to it, what am I losing in that process? So we're starting to now bring these frameworks out through examples in the power sector and in telecommunication. Again, we've done studies to see in different geographical conditions, where is it that your telecommunication system might fail and what do you need to do to address it? So again, the second part of our work is really starting to do on the ground technical assistance to countries. At this point, we're working across 48 countries, and our way of working is through grants. So we're giving grants to countries to get expertise to then look at infrastructure from a resilient point of view. Third part of it is around capacity building. So because we are a coalition and we are a coalition that has a range of government types. We've got governments that are where infrastructure has existed for a long time. We've got governments where infrastructure is just being built. We've got capacity where there is incredible amount of capacity. For example, France. We've got countries where capacity is really low. So we're trying to see how, as a coalition, we can create opportunities for that capacities to be shared. So, for example, the Italian government is facilitating capacity building for Bhutan, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, etc. On learning from them, learning from the Italian experiences in earthquake and landslide management. Because we are a coalition, we're also trying to see how we facilitate those kinds of engagements through the coalition, bringing expertise from countries to countries that need it, or create new opportunities. So, for example, we put communities of practices together. We put one together to look at extreme heat in the transit sector. So again, something that has not necessarily been dealt with quite recently. I mean, it's a new issue of extreme heat. With Netherlands, we're actually working on water resilience, etc. So first part was around data. Second part was around really facilitating some evidence on the ground through technical assistance. The third part is capacity building, but more so from a point of view of sharing knowledge across each other, across different countries as a coalition. The last bit of the work that we're trying to do is elevating this conversation in global conferences or global engagements. So, for example, we've been a knowledge partner to the G20 since its inception in India 3 years back. So with India, with Brazil, with South Africa, we've been trying to bring together examples of what is resilient infrastructure in these forums. So again, pushing it at the leadership level. Again, in 6 years, we're trying to just say, how does one build so the data around it, the experiences on the ground around it, the capacities that are required to start to address it in different contexts, and then the conversations at the highest level that start to recognize why this is critical for countries that are investing in, billions of dollars to build, to upgrade, to build new. That conversation is happening now in ministries of finance, for example, and technical ministries as well. So we've been able to do that by pulling in the evidence of why it's important to pay attention to disasters.